Okay, you're live.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the, what date is it? April 6th. City Council Oversight Committee. We have 3 topics on the agenda today. Topic number 1 is a continued discussion regarding boards and commissions. It's going to be City Attorney Catherine Walker give a presentation.
Thank you. So this has been discussed, I think, 4 times in the last couple of years. I went back and reviewed all of those notes, and the discussion has kind of changed somewhat going back to 2019. So the recommendations or the proposals in the memo that was sent out are based on your most recent discussion back in November, and I will go through those briefly. We started out with 36 boards, commissions, and committees. Several are established by charter, by resolution, most by ordinance, some by contract or statute. And so the way we adjust each of these committees may differ based on how they were formed. Some of the committees, we don't control those committees, we don't staff those committees. They're committees usually by contract or by state statute. CUMCD is a good example of that, where we appoint members to represent us, but that is a completely separate entity. So the committees and boards and commissions that you all looked at were ones where there was some overlap in duties. And so these proposals to consolidate the committees came from that type of discussion. Then we talked a lot about where did we need ward-specific representation or experience-based or interest-based representation. And so all of that has made it into these proposals. The first proposal was to consolidate the Greenbelt Commission and Planning Commission, and then also to make Planning Commission appointments ward-specific. And so you'll see here, I've outlined the current language for the Greenbelt Commission, and then the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission was created by charter, so to change this, we'll have to make some adjustments to the charter. Conveniently, the Charter Review Commission is already meeting, of course. So we can add that to some of the cleanup that we do when we take some of these changes to the voters. It specifies in this change language the ward specificity, so a total of 9 members, 1 from each ward and 1 at large. Same appointment process, same 3 years. That was something that the committees discussed several times, as having some sort of uniformity for terms, and I think 3 years was really what was settled on. But we've added language that says 2 of the appointments shall be appointed based upon their interest or expertise regarding open space preservation. And that was really just pulled from the Greenbelt Commission language on the first page of the memo. That is how those members are selected. And so we want to make sure 2 members of the Planning Commission are selected similarly. And then that would eliminate the Greenbelt Commission provisions from Chapter 4 of the code. That's where the appointed boards and commissions primarily lie within our code, and so that would result in eliminating that commission. The next proposal was to consolidate Tree Board, Bicycle Advisory Committee, and the Parks Board. The Tree Board is established by code. The Bicycle Advisory Board is established by resolution, and the Board of Park Commissioners is established by charter. So this is another thing we would add to the charter election ballot if council opted to go forward. And again, you can see here in the underlined language on the bottom of page 3, 2 appointees will be selected based on their interest or expertise regarding urban forestry. So that's the Tree Board interest. And then 2 would be selected based on their interest in cycling, including residents from cycling and transportation groups, health promotion organizations, OU, Norman schools, and local businesses which support bicycle use and other interested citizens. And that is pulled from the Bicycle Advisory Committee resolution. The next proposal would be rescoping the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee. This one's pretty interesting. It was created by resolution in 2002 or 3, but it really didn't get seated until 2005. So back then it was during a contentious time having to do with the animal shelter. We were building the adoption facility, and so there was a focus in the language at that time on the adoption facility, humane treatment of animals, and spaying and neutering. So we would want to rescind that resolution and then codify that committee in Chapter 4 to make it permanent. And we just need further discussion about what kind of updates we would be doing to those duties. There was a lot of discussion, and in my notes anyway, from the last meeting, about focusing on education, about wanting maybe some rural representation, not necessarily ward specificity, but wanting to have those rural interests represented. And so that's one we'd need further discussion on, so we can kind of flesh that out and get something drafted. The fourth proposal, this is an easy one: eliminate the Children's Rights Coordinating Commission. They haven't met in quite some time. And the Human Rights Commission really has a lot of the same duties. And so that would be an easy repeal of the section in Chapter 4 where it was created. Another thing that you all discussed on several committees was increasing the committee membership. We have some committees that only have 5 members, and there was discussions about wanting to increase that to 7. Currently, Board of Adjustment requires 5 persons for 3-year terms, and that is in Chapter 4. Interestingly, in Chapter 22, the zoning ordinance, you have to have 3 members of the board to vote yes or make any decision. And that's similar to council's requirement that you could have a quorum, but if you don't have 5, you can't take action under our charter. So this would make changes to keep that consistent. So instead of 5 members, there would be 7. And then instead of a concurring vote of 3, it would be a concurring vote of 4 to represent the quorum. Proposal 6 is the same thing, Norman Election Commission. They currently only have 5 members, and there was discussion about wanting to bring that up to 7. And so that's a simple change you can see there on page 5 of the memo. We also talked, and some of these committees have I want to say fluctuated over the discussions. The past 3 or 4 meetings we've discussed this, but these are the ones that were really discussed in November. A Senior Issues Committee, Youth Advisory Committee, which is really trying to take some of those youth council functions and put that into a committee format. Transportation Committee, Budget Committee, and then a Core Norman Development Committee. So each of those would need to be codified in Chapter 4 for consistency. We would outline the duties, the frequency of the meetings, what kind of representation we want, whether it's interest group, specific qualifications, ward specific. Each of those probably have different needs. And then we need to work with the city manager to identify the department that would staff the committee. That's more of a practical suggestion. It's not necessarily something that gets codified. And then the final proposal that I outlined in the memo was the consistency issue that I discussed earlier, talking about every committee appointment being 3-year terms and a 3-year term limit. So we're not kind of all over the board on some of these. And with the term limit, I think the discussion was really, making sure we're bringing in new voices and getting more people involved and helping to develop policy for the city and make recommendations to council. So this would be a very big ordinance amendment to do all of this. And we've still got a little bit of work to do on some of these committees, as I outlined. So we need to think about how we address current appointments when we do that. So what I'm talking about here is, will we do this as people roll off the committee? It'll be a trick drafting that within the ordinance to make sure that occurs smoothly rather than just start over, which I know we don't want to do. So that's something we'll have to kind of work through as we draft the ordinance.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'll just kind of make a couple comments on a few of these and then kind of pitch it to everyone else for comments. The kind of first comment I had was kind of about the Bicycle Advisory Committee and whether or not that would be better to be put in with parks or with transportation. I feel like we kind of talked about it either way. So that's something for us to consider. And for kind of, excuse me, kind of for the naming and the scoping of that committee, because this is also, if we do include bicycles in there, I think maybe instead of just continuing to call it the Parks Board, maybe it's the Board of Parks and Recreation. If it's going to be including bicycles, I want to do right by the Bicycle Advisory Committee and not just completely eliminate bicycles from any mention in that committee. But maybe it's better off in transportation. The animal welfare one is the one that actually kind of kicked off this entire topic for me, because it's the committee that seems to chafe against the bounds of its obligations quite frequently. If we are going to keep any of the current directives, whether or not it's promoting adoptions or spaying and neutering, anything like that, they have no budget with which to do that. So they're tasked with, promoting spaying and neutering. They're tasked with all of these, educating the community and coordinating volunteer services, but they don't have a budget to do that. So if they're going to be doing anything that's public facing, I don't think they would have a problem with that. I think they would really like being able to do it, but they'll need even a small budget with which to work. So kind of regardless of which way we go with that, if it's going to be less advisory to council and more public facing, then we'll just need to resource it appropriately. I know Councilmember Hall is going to have some questions and some comments about the development committee. Kind of more generally, Mike, I did have some questions about the timeline for implementation of this, kind of with each committee. Are we going to be able to do it generally? Are we going to have to look kind of committee by committee based on the tenure of each member? And then I just want to clarify, because I think this is what you meant, Catherine, but I just want to make sure. For proposal 8, it says change every committee appointment in chapter 4 to 3-year terms. And then I assume you meant 3-term limit?
Yes.
Not a limit of 3 years.
Right. Yes. 3-term. 3.
Okay. So
3
9 total years to be
terms,
able to
yes.
serve on that committee.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make sure. I was like, wow, we really are going to be getting a diversity of voices, because they're only going to serve for 3 years and then we're going to send them on their way. So those are really my comments. Just when it comes to animal welfare oversight, let's just make sure, however we want it, whatever we want it to be, that it's resourced appropriately. And I really like all of the proposals for new committees. One thing I'd like to just point out, when we're looking at language in these committees, is to, wherever we can, change the word citizen to the word resident. That was something about the budget committee that I was like, oh, citizen budget committee was, of course, my terminology. And then I thought about it more and I was like, no, resident budget committee is the way it needs to be. So let's just kind of keep an eye on that language as we're looking at each of these ordinances and resolutions. And let me pull up. I don't know who else has their. I don't know who came first, because I did not have my panelist list open. So between Councilmember Hall and Mayor Clark, I'll do that one on the honor system. Okay.
It was me. And I just
Mayor
have a
Clark.
comment. My comment is simply, I've been kind of unofficially doing the 3-term limit as I've been making more appointments. And so it's been a little heartbreaking to tell these people who have been in these positions for like 20 years that I appreciate your service, but it's time to get a new perspective on here. So I have been doing that. And it would be nice to add that it doesn't mean you can't serve on a different board. It just means you can't serve on that board. So I'm not banning someone from applying again. It's just, if that makes sense.
I think when we discussed it before, Councilmember Holman said, what about committees where we can't find another person, and maybe it's a specially qualified position, or we just can't find another person, because we do have a lot of longevity on some committees that we don't have turnover on, and so we can include language that would allow, if there's not another qualified candidate, they can continue to serve.
I would support that, because I ran into that with the housing authority. Like, I actually had a call with, I can't remember whoever runs that, and it was a good talk. So some are very, very unique, but for the most part, we don't have trouble finding volunteers. That's all I got.
That also brought up a good point, that if there's any way that we can build in language that people can only serve on one committee at a time, that we've kind of not gotten tripped up on that one, but we do have some instances right now where people are serving on 2 very critical committees at the same time. And I think just having that in black and white would be helpful. Councilmember Hall.
Okay. I have a very unstable connection. So, Chairman Biermann, did you just recognize me?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
So we'll see how long this lasts because I'm having a lot of issues right now. I don't know if you can tell on your end, but thank you. So just some general comments. I was going to say the same thing about for the overall structure of it. If we are going to, I would be in support of allowing people to just serve on one committee at a time. I do like having more consistency across the board with the 3-year terms and then the 3-term limit. I also am in support of, those specialized circumstances where we may need to be a little bit more flexible about allowing somebody to continue. And I also really like one of the things that's built into the Historic District Commission, which is you're limited to 3 terms and expected to go off for a year, but then you do have the possibility to return to serve again. So that might be something that we want to think about too, to provide that opportunity to refresh the committees with fresh voices and fresh perspectives, but also have a path, one way or the other, to allow people that have a niche and a specialized expertise to be able to come back. And particularly, if we're not able to fill that area of expertise with other people. So support in either of those things. The other thing I was noticing, and this just might be a language cleanup, but it seems like the assumption is that you are a resident of Norman to serve on all of these committees, but that's not really consistent throughout the language here. So I think that might be something that we want to add.
As we put these all into chapter 4, there is language in chapter 4 that requires that, so that will fix that problem. But yeah, as we pull them from different sources, the language is all over the place.
Yeah, okay. So just, that to me is more an editing thing, but that's good. But I think that's really important to make sure that people understand that that's the expectation too. Then the other piece I think was taken care of at the end with proposal 8, that we are going to apply across the board the 3-year term and then the 3-year term limit. So that will get addressed to all of these things as well. So I'm just going to start with just go down each proposal. So proposal 1 of consolidating the Greenbelt Commission. So if it goes to planning is an advisory board, right? Okay. So I guess my only heartburn about the Greenbelt Commission and really some of these others in consolidating, we're losing a lot of input on, some pretty important topics to people in the community. And I know one of the issues with some of the Greenbelt commissioners is that they would have, more authority or more heft to the kind of recommendations that they're making. And if they're part of planning, that still keeps them in an advisory role. So that's just a comment there. Let's see. Then, because I was wondering about consolidating the tree board and the bicycle advisory board to the parks board. Now the parks board, is that quasi judicial or is it advisory?
It's advisory.
It's advisory too? Okay, so that doesn't make any difference, because I was thinking, well, if they would have more authority for recommending, maybe the Greenbelt Commission would be fit someplace else better, but that doesn't really take care of that problem. And so I'm okay with consolidating the tree board and the advisory board, and I like the way we have it set up to make sure that we're specifically having those interests represented on both the park board and the planning commission, that we're specifically looking to have that area of expertise continue to be represented. So I think that's important. Let's see. Fine with the proposal 4 on eliminating the Children's Right Coordinating Commission, because we have another natural home for that. I also am in support of increasing the committee membership on the Board of Adjustment and on the Election Commission. So fine there. So the only real comments that I wanted to throw in on top of all of those things were the proposal of the new committees, and specifically aimed at the Core Norm and Development Committee, because I think this probably originated with me originally back in 2019. And the thinking on that has really evolved as time goes by, because at the time we had taken a hiatus with the Center City Form-Based Code Ad Hoc Committee, which is outside of this board and commission structure, as I understand it, because it's an ad hoc committee under the city council. So I understand sort of the evolution, the progression of the discussion, but at this time, really because of a lot of different reasons, pandemic related, it's been a long period of time now before we've been able to really resolve how to move forward with the Center City Form-Based Code Ad Hoc Committee. We're currently in dialogue with the planning department on how to move forward with that. So my personal recommendation on the Core Norm and Development Committee is to just put that off for the foreseeable future. I think it's a staffing issue. I think we have our work cut out for us with just trying to figure out how we're moving forward with the Center City Form-Based Code Committee. I still would like that to be an ad hoc committee for now under the city council. And we also are going to be under a time constraint with the comp plan and considering the comp plan. And I just think the staffing issue from the planning department is a significant one to think about. And I think this is, I would recommend that we, move this out for now and, maybe come back to it later when we have some of these other things fleshed out a little bit better.
Councilmember Holman.
Oh, thank you. So a couple things with the, let's see. I guess one concern about consolidation is, potentially losing a voice for a subject and it getting lost amongst other things. So like most recently, the Planning Commission, the sorority house that we recently voted on and approved that had the tree issue, nobody in the Planning Commission even asked about that tree or any of the trees or any of the green space actually. And so I am very concerned about that. Bicycles as well. I don't know that bicycle infrastructure is part of parks really. To me, it can be recreational, but I don't know that we're trying to promote bikes as recreational necessarily. We're trying to promote them as an alternative transportation to cars. And that's why we're building bike lanes and the multimodal paths. So I would have concern that there wouldn't be a voice for bicycles specifically, or we wouldn't be getting any feedback about bicycle infrastructure. That maybe we'll get feedback about paths and parks and stuff. I'm not sure. But I do understand that having a lot of committees takes staff time and that can be difficult. So I'm not against consolidation at all. That's just some of the concerns I would have about consolidating them in this way. Term limits, I think, is fine. 3 terms. I would want to definitely, there be some leeway in there if it comes up and if it is some sort of specialty and we can't find anybody else at this moment. I also would, some way that we can make sure that we do have somebody, before we kick somebody off, that we do have somebody lined up that will commit to doing it too, because, appointing people and then there's them stepping down halfway or a few months into it. If we just had somebody on there that was there for 9 years and never missed a meeting, and we appoint somebody and then they step off a few months later because something else came up, some concern maybe about that. It probably wouldn't be that big of a deal really, but I do think it would be good to have, when people get appointed, they know right then that I could serve 3 terms, and there's no expectation beyond that. And that way, we don't have to be in a situation where somebody was there for 20 years and we want to get somebody maybe new on that wants to serve and have to have an awkward conversation with them. I think that is definitely a good change. In regard to ad hoc committees, I would want to make sure that someone could serve on more than one committee if they're already serving on what I would call a regular committee, and we need them to serve on an ad hoc committee like Center City, because Center City, we have had a planning commissioner on there before. We've had Cynthia Rogers has been on there, and she's also on the TIFO, financial oversight. So I would like to leave it open so that if we have people serving on current committees, if we felt they were the best person to serve on an ad hoc committee that comes up for a specific issue, that that we could still appoint them to that as well. But I would agree that any standing committees, not having people serving in more than one capacity is probably a good idea and can help us get more people an opportunity to serve.
That was definitely the intent. And so, I think that formalizing that in the language so we don't end up in a situation where someone is prevented from serving on an ad hoc committee because of how it's interpreted. I think that's a good catch.
And yeah, that's really, the only real issues I have about that is just making sure that if we do consolidate committees, that there is some sort of designated position or positions for somebody that has expertise in bicycle advocacy. They're a cyclist, they use the bike lanes to get to work, whatever it may be. And then making sure that if the planning commission is taking on responsibilities of the Greenbelt, that they are, asking those questions for sure. So that's kind of what the benefit, I think, of having those individual committees is that we do get feedback about a very specific thing. And again, I understand that can be, cumbersome to the staff time and resources to do all of those all the time. And sometimes they're not even needed. And so, but do want to make sure that we aren't losing that particular advice by consolidating. So
yeah, and I think some of these will require some tweaking to the duties of the commissions and boards to make sure that they're capturing those consolidated interests as well.
I agree, and I think I feel more strongly about tree board probably than Greenbelt Commission. I feel like more often than not, when I see that something has gone to Greenbelt Commission, I go and look at the Greenbelt Commission minutes, and it's just a verbal affirmative statement that no, there's no green space in this. There's no public green space in here. So box checked. That, as long as we can fold that in a little bit better, I think it could even have more beneficial results. I do think that Councilmember Holman makes a cogent argument for putting bicycles under transportation and not under parks. I think the interplay of bikes and other forms of transportation is also a pretty big sticking point oftentimes when we're developing things like complete streets. I go, hey, and bikes go, I still don't like it, or that green stripe, I hate it, or, things that I never would have thought. So I think that having different modes of transportation and people interested in those different modes of transportation talking to each other and not just to us could also be really beneficial. About Catherine, maybe you can answer this for details about how at what point should we flesh out any kind of outline of duties or frequency of meeting for the new committees. Because I feel like the other topics we have on for tonight are going to be lengthy. So now is probably not the time to be going through the duties of 7 new committees and 1 old one.
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to need a little more committee work. We are going through a recodification process of our ordinances right now too. And so all of this.
Oh, good. So you've got lots of time on your hands.
Oh, sure. All of this is going to come to you before the end of this year the entire code with some reworking and reorganization. So we can continue to work on this through the committees and flesh out those duties and everything, and then either include this when we do the recodification or after we do the recodification, so we don't have to include that as part of the renumbering and reorganization of the whole thing.
Okay, so you're actually looking at not really passing this until later this year?
Possibly, and I think each committee, as I try to figure out how we implement it with each committee, it may require different language for each committee depending on their current term limits and when we can ease into this so we aren't just, kicking a bunch of people off or affecting their current terms. Sort of like we do on charter stuff relating to council. We don't want to affect the term they're currently serving, but get it going the next term when we have the opportunity to appoint someone again.
So instead of Greenbelt Commission ending in a week, it'll be kind of a phase out.
Yeah, they don't need to be alarmed.
Okay, then I think this is some good insight. The one thing I'd love to be able to give you a little more feedback on, Councilmember Hall, I see you. I just want to, maybe I can get you to answer this question as well. For animal welfare oversight, at least some idea of the direction we would like staff to go when looking at rescoping the duties of it. This might take a little mini update from City Manager Pyle about what, if any, discussion we're having about continued changes at the Animal Welfare Center. Might keep that in mind kind of as we're moving forward. But if any other council members have any thoughts about how that should be reimagined, I'd love to be able to give staff some feedback before they start working on it.
And staff would appreciate that. The pre-pandemic animal welfare operation and pandemic animal welfare operation, it's been a while since we kind of remembered where we were and how it worked and what those opportunities may look like. It has been, that operation probably saw as many visible impacts as any operation we've got. And I think this summer will bring about a great opportunity to say, okay, before we get back to what used to be normal, let's decide where we think we want to be instead of just normal, and take that opportunity to go ahead and implement where we may find opportunities to provide a better level of service for our two-legged residents and our four-legged residents as well.
Great, thanks. Councilmember Hall.
I just thought of a couple more things, and this may already be built in also, but do we have an across the board attendance requirement for boards and commissions? Okay, so
yeah, you can't miss more than 3 in a row.
Okay.
Where you get.
Okay, so we already have that covered. Great. And then I was just going to say that I really do like the ward specific designation for the planning commission, to have every ward have, their own planning commissioner from that ward. So really like that. And just to, pile back on the bicycle trees and Greenbelt, we touched on it some, and it sounds like we do have an opportunity to tweak that, because it seems like with the Greenbelt and, well, really with all 3 of them, we don't want to lose that input and that expertise. It does make a lot more sense to have bicycle with the newly formed transportation committee, especially with increased interest in multimodal transportation and a bicycle as a form of transportation and not recreation, and really forward thinking about when we may have driverless cars and everything else, that how the bicycle as a form of transportation fits in. We don't want to lose that. And the Greenbelt Commission too, there's a couple of people on that commission who have really deep levels of expertise as far as recommending. And I really want to figure out how we get that into the planning commission process, because just waiting to have that input at the planning commission, it just seems like there needs to be some tweaking there of how that conversation gets to happen along the planning process. So just wanted to support some of the comments of Councilmember Holman on that as well. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, she did not take my bait about giving feedback on animal welfare. Well played, Councilmember Hall.
Well, in all honesty, I think it's important to, consider how we need to move forward, but that's just not my area of expertise. So I really need to rely on my colleagues as to, how to move forward with the animal, with that particular committee. And I think, City Manager Pyle makes some good comments about the animal welfare Oversight Committee, as well as every way that we do business. I think, need to be very intentional about lessons learned and how we move forward after a pandemic. So
I agree. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, on the animal welfare oversight. So the committee, really has fulfilled its purpose as far as its original existence, which was overseeing a new shelter that's happened. It's, stayed around though, and we've had I've served on it. That's where we first met Councilmember Biermann and Councilmember Wilson when I was serving on that committee. And, we've been able to oversee different significant changes in policy when it comes to animal welfare. But I think, again, that it has fulfilled the purpose it's created for. And if we want to keep it around going forward, I would agree with Councilmember Biermann that it probably has to have some kind of budget, because to me, the really purpose remaining for them is going to be advocacy about our existing policies, about different things that are going on, because most of what we deal with is development issues, and there's no requirement for pet anything when it comes to building a house or an apartment or a new business. So they don't, unlike Greenbelt or these other commissions that review development projects and give us feedback, the animal welfare oversight doesn't have that function. And so if we're going to have them doing advocacy, education about existing policies, spay and neuter, all these different things that we offer in the city of Norman that we want our residents to know about, take advantage of, then I definitely agree that there's going to have to be some kind of budget for them to do that in some way. So if we're going to keep that committee around, that to me sounds like what the purpose of it would be going forward. And if other policy issues come up that the city council in the future wants to consider, that's something they may ask the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee to take a look at and provide feedback on. But it seems most of the time they're going to be filling that advocacy education role. And I agree, I don't know what much they can really do other than the individual members of the committee using their own money or sharing stuff on their own social media, I guess. But other than that, yeah, I think they've got to have some sort of budget for printing or copies or something. I don't know, or paid online paid ads on Facebook or YouTube, or maybe they come up with an ad campaign to promote the Animal Welfare Center and things like that. But yeah, I agree with comments of Councilmember Biermann on that one.
So before we wrap this up, I'll give just a couple little thoughts on that. Kind of my thought was that, first of all, one of the big things they do is review the animal statistics every month, which I think is really important. They keep an eye on the live release rate. They can ask questions about any issues with wildlife, or why did we have a slew of dogs, die of medical reasons in, shelter custody, things like that. The other thing that they can do is assist staff with some of the things that are on animal welfare staff's plate that is tough for them to incorporate along with their daily jobs. Like, could the committee be tasked every month with setting a couple issues to highlight for staff to highlight on the Facebook page every month? The veterinarian says, hey, because we have a veterinarian on our Animal Welfare Oversight Committee, next month is Heartworm Prevention Month. So it would be really great if staff could put together a couple posts about heartworm prevention, I'll send some information to, Mark Bechtel, and he can get the post put together. And then the committee members, it will be appropriate for them to share it on their social medias, that everyone should be expected to share this information publicly. That wouldn't take much of a budget. It would take at least the topic setting off of the plate of animal welfare staff and really help encourage spay neuter, encourage adoption. And that can be something that they do every month for the next month. So just things like that, I think, are things that we can consider. But I think we've got some good work going on here. Catherine, I'd like to think that maybe the elimination of the Children's Rights Commission could probably just be something that could be thrown on a consent docket. Or are you still planning to do even those kind of all at once?
We could get that done more quickly. That's an easy one, but it'll be an ordinance, so it would have to have a public hearing on second reading. But we can get that done fairly quickly. That is an easy one.
Well, great. I feel like this is good enough progress that I don't feel bad leaving this for the next Oversight Committee chair, trying to be sensitive to how many committee chairs have to handle a topic before it either goes away or gets passed. All right, well, then we can move on to item number 2, which is the regulation of unsolicited written materials. It looks like we have our Assistant City Attorney, Anthony. Can you pronounce your last name for me so that I don't butcher it?
Purinton.
Purinton, okay. Assistant City Attorney Purinton, take it away.
All right, glad to see you guys again. I guess I just need to share my screen for the PowerPoint. Tell me if you guys can see that.
We can.
Okay. All right, so I'm here today to talk about the regulation of unsolicited written materials. This is not the first time I have talked about this issue, and it is not the first time the city attorney's office prior to me has talked about this issue. This has been an issue frequently talked about. We have previous memos on this issue that were issued to city council back in 2010, twice, 2013, and then by me in 2019. So this has been an ongoing issue with ongoing discussion, and there's been relevant case law that has been gone through since the last time. Each time there has been case law development on this issue. There's a little picture there. I am the handy dandy photographer. Just for some context, that is my neighbor's buyer's edge that has been there since I took that picture on Monday. I think it was delivered last Wednesday. That is in the sidewalk. Now it has meandered on over into my yard, so I'm going to pick it up when I go home today. So as past memos have talked about, there has been a potential solution with an ordinance enactment on how we can deal with this issue. It was one that was first submitted by Lexington Fayette, and that was, I think, styled by another county government before Lexington Fayette in the 6th Circuit. So now I think there are 2 different ordinances that have been passed in the 6th Circuit that have eventually made its way to court and have been, I guess, approved by that court. And they have not been struck down. They have been found constitutionally valid. And so the problem with this is why it's great in the 6th Circuit. In the 10th Circuit, where Oklahoma sits, it has not gone in front of the 10th Circuit. So this 6th Circuit case, which upheld this ordinance, would not be able to be cited for its precedential value here. It'd be persuasive, but it does not mean the 10th Circuit has to necessarily decide that issue in the same way. So to kind of give you an overview of what this ordinance does, it only allows unsolicited written materials to be delivered in like one of 6 places. So like on a porch, in a mail slot, between the front door, and then like a storm door or like a screen door. So it kind of limits where you can put it, so you can't just throw it in the yard. And that's the big problem. What's kind of termed the fly and fling method of delivery that most of these publications use to quickly, efficiently, and cheaply distribute their materials, which has caused several cities different issues. So there are some First Amendment concerns because this is protected speech. So, it's a commercial publication, which usually gets a different kind of treatment than if it were not commercial, but there are some difficulties there. So whenever, you can't, it's hard targeting commercial speech and not also targeting, like regular, like political speech and other stuff like that. So you kind of have to do it all at once and kind of regulate all speech, because if you try to just narrowly regulate commercial speech, then you kind of get into the weeds on like, well, then it's no longer content neutral, because you're basing, your regulation based on the content of the speech that's actually being regulated. So, if you notice, we go back to Lexington Fayette's ordinance, it's unsolicited written materials. So, for example, if it was unsolicited commercial materials, that would be content-based, which receives a higher level of scrutiny. This would include unsolicited written materials. So that not only includes commercial speech, but also, like regular, like for example, like, hey, like if someone like flung a, invitation to a block party or, a church, that would also be covered in this ordinance. So it's important to note this isn't just commercial, it's all speech. So in order to be a time, place, and manner restriction, which receives intermediate level of scrutiny, which is easier to pass because you don't have to go to strict scrutiny, you have to, one, you can't distinguish based on the content of a speech. It also must be narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest. And it also must leave open ample alternative channels for communication. So what that means, which I'll kind of go into each of those in detail in these next slides. And so there hasn't been any, since 2019, there hasn't been any 10th Circuit precedent that has really, been super helpful on this specific topic, because the facts really play into that analysis. Like, does it meet those three factors? So there haven't been any like specific factual issues that have presented to the 10th Circuit that would really be helpful. But there has been a recent decision, McCraw versus Oklahoma City, that does kind of give us an idea of how the court conducts this analysis and how might we stand if we have to go through the same analysis on these different set of facts. So this recently went in front of in front of the 10th Circuit. We also had the city of Norman also had a decision going in front of the 10th Circuit the same day that this one went in front of the 10th Circuit. So that's kind of interesting. But anyway, this was what was termed as the panhandling ordinance for Oklahoma City. It struck down Oklahoma City's prohibition on standing, sitting, or staying in public medians. And that, I say it in quotes because that's what City Council originally termed it in their like legislative materials. Well, that probably doesn't sound that great. So they kind of switched it to be more of a harm to public safety. That's how they kind of, interpreted it going forward. But the court specifically mentioned, at first, what you guys were looking at was a panhandling ordinance. So they started to kind of shift gears and say, this is a public safety measure. We don't want any pedestrians being hurt by cars who go into the median. And so we don't want anyone on the medians. Well, what the court found was that prohibition was way too broad and not tailored enough to really effectuate that public safety harm and to actually cure that harm. And they also, on the other hand, didn't think that the harm to public safety was actually sufficient. They didn't think it was a legitimate harm that was provable by Oklahoma City. And I think part of that is because they weren't actually trying to, promote public health. They were trying to get rid of panhandling. So I think that's, that was a piece that the court was very cognizant of, but they termed it, and they just couldn't prove what they were actually trying to, that it was actually for public safety and not for something else. And then finally, the city failed to consider alternatives that would actually achieve public safety, but that did not impinge free speech. So what does this mean for us if we want to enact an ordinance under a different set of facts? Well, one, we must actually show that whatever harm we're trying to solve by these unsolicited written materials is actually real, that's actually provable, that we can actually bring some sort of evidence to court saying this is a legitimate issue. Whatever harms it is, whether it be, aesthetic, community, like we want to decrease litter, right? I mean, we actually have to come forward to the court and say, this is, the evidence that we have, and it actually has to prove that there is a harm. One of the things that Oklahoma City ran into is they had the, some of the, officers from the police department, testify that, there was a lot of pedestrian accidents in Oklahoma City. That's kind of a reason that we should, enact this ordinance, but the court was very particular, and it said, well, actually, if you look at the 43 cases that you had, only 2 of those happened on a median. So you really have to consider, like, one, is the harm actually real, and does the evidence actually support that it's a harm that this ordinance is directed at? And you also have to, secondly, consider alternatives. So, this may be one alternative that would be very effective in preventing this harm. But if there are others that are just as effective, or even maybe slightly less effective, but that doesn't harm free speech, we probably have to go with those alternatives instead of the ordinance that harms free speech. And then finally, we have to leave open alternative routes for communication. I think this one is the least likely to lose on, just because the Sixth Circuit, they were very, they pointed out, and I thought it was a very compelling argument, that when you limit the distribution to these particular places, like in their door or on their porch, they're more likely to actually look at that communication. So it's not, impinging your communication to these residents, because it's more likely that they're going to read it. So I thought that is at least one point in our favor that can translate over into the 10th Circuit. So some of the harms that have been, talked about at the last meetings and in the memos have been, the aesthetic value of the community. This isn't necessary. This is pretty unsightly. There's also stormwater concerns, because it could wash into the city stormwaters or into the drains. And then finally, sidewalk access. If you remember that picture I took, it was in the middle of the sidewalk. Sometimes I think the publications are kind of thick. So if you're in a wheelchair, it's not going to be super easy to, get over that speed bump. And it could be kind of hard if you have some like walking or stability issues, if you have to if you accidentally step on it. So, but those are some of the harms. These aren't necessarily comprehensive, and I'm kind of interested to see what community comment has been like to the council members, and exactly like what they're complaining about, because I think that really has to inform what harms we present to any court that justify enacting this ordinance. And also, there's some alternatives to consider here. So I think the first and foremost has been, already kind of directed at council, like placing the burden on the homeowner. Like, for example, we already, make homeowners take their trash cans back up, to beside the house after trash day. So if this is something that we similarly have to do to, for the buyer's edge or any other solicited written materials, it might just be easier, because it doesn't impinge upon free speech, to make the homeowner pick it up. Finally, they also have an opt-out number that you can call. Whether or not that's effective, we would really have to look into that, because that might be a viable alternative. It wasn't in the Sixth Circuit, but again, we have to kind of talk about it, we have to have some sort of evidence that it doesn't work in order to be persuasive to any court. And I think there's some other ones. I think the only real big one, I think, is the I think the restriction on delivery of the last issue is still not picked up. That might be one that is, not very burdensome, but also at the same time, there's some same enforcement issues that we're going to talk about later on in some of those alternatives. So, and then finally, the ample alternative channels is kind of the last of the 3 prongs. I think the Sixth Circuit, like I said, kind of addressed that. It actually makes it more likely that your readers are going to actually read it, because when they do pick it up, it's probably not going to be soaked, or the dew from the morning isn't going to make it unreadable. So it's more likely that you're going to get readers if you deliver it in these 1 of 6 places. So I think this is the big barrier to enacting any ordinance like this, because there's going to be some major enforcement issues that are particular to the city of Norman that wouldn't be particular to like Lexington, Fayette, and the Sixth Circuit. Okay, so these enforcement issues arise from, this is going to be a criminal citation that we're going to have to issue. So in Lexington, Fayette, for example, they're able to shift the burden to say, basically there's a rebuttable presumption that whoever's name is on the publication is the one who's going to be liable eventually for violation of the ordinance. We can't do that, because Lexington Fayette provides for a civil penalty, whereas ours is a criminal penalty. There are higher standards in the criminal prosecution than there would be in a civil action. So there is no burden shifting in the criminal realm, because the burden is on the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person actually violated the ordinance. So, and some more enforcement issues here, aside from the higher burden, would be who is the appropriate defendant? Because, for example, if you have, it's not the buyer's edge who's like flinging these materials. It's actually probably an independent contractor that they've hired to fling those materials for them. So getting to the actual corporation is going to be difficult. And keep in mind that this is a criminal charge with a corporation as its defendant, which causes some procedural issues, some enforcement issues, and keep in mind, this is going to be tried in municipal court. So, having City of Norman versus Buyer's Edge and, the city, municipal court is going to be, we've had issues with that in the past. So it just creates some barriers there that, might be a little prohibitive. Finally, you need a witness. So you need a neighbor, an officer, someone who can actually pinpoint who actually threw the publication, right? And so getting an identity of someone to actually assign that docket to, and then having a witness who can testify at an eventual trial is going to be necessary in order to prosecute the charge. So, how we get about those is going to be important, one, on the back end, but also on the front end, because if it's not really enforceable, then alternatives start looking a lot better. And when alternatives look a lot better, then you kind of get into the issue where you can't justify the ordinance if you can't actually solve the harm that you're trying to remedy. So if we can't solve that harm because it's unenforceable, well, then it's likely an unconstitutional burden on speech. So there are kind of a two reasons that the enforcement issues are so big in this scenario. We are still looking into potential other alternatives other than maybe a criminal action, like maybe like a injunction or something like that. We're still in the initial processes of researching that, but we are looking into the enforcement issues and how to kind of deal with those as they come up. But for right now, these create pretty substantial burdens. So I think that is all I have. I know that was a pretty lengthy discussion, but there is some complicated case law that goes into that. I think I need to stop share, then I can actually see you guys. So is there any questions? I know that was a lot of information.
Mayor Clark.
So I had mentioned this, I think, to the city manager and maybe even the city attorney. If we put out a call to Norman residents to go find proof that this is in storm drains, it'll be there like next week. Yeah, and then I'm picturing like a Leslie Knope style of stakeout to wait for these people to come deliver it. I will do that, and I'm guessing Councilmember Hall will as well. So I don't know. I get that that's difficult, but I also want to show that we're trying. This is something that we need to at least attempt to address, and I really appreciate the research that you've done, because I do think you've made enough arguments where if I was a judge, I'd be like, good point. It might actually get read. It doesn't get, run over. It doesn't get wet. So it might be more expensive, but create jobs. We're coming out of a pandemic. So I don't know. I appreciate your work on that, and I fully support moving forward with that. And if we need to enlist the assistance of Norman residents, I am 100% confident we'll get more information and photos than we know how to handle.
I completely agree. And I would say, just on top of that, before you continue on, I know Councilmember Hall can probably check off every single one of those alternatives to consider boxes. I know that in some of our previous discussions about this, I mean, we've got some absolutely awful stories from residents attempting to get themselves off a list, being given reassurances that they are, and then it's showing up again the very next week. So I think we could probably, given enough diligence on this, and I think Norman residents would be all over it, we can show that we have tried, that we have given grace, we have assumed positive intent, and there has been no willingness to change practices.
And I do want to address the stormwater issue. I talked with Carrie Everson, and I asked her, are there any documentable issues that we've had with these, washing in to like storm grates or anything like that? And she said that there have maybe been one or two in the past couple of years, but none that are documentable or measurable. So the stormwater issue, I haven't, it's not like we've gone down there with some flashlights and seen if we can see any Buyer's Edge that are just lingering down there. But as far as to me, that's pretty compelling testimony that that is not, and that's not that it has to be, because we also have the aesthetic value, but then you're left with just the one problem, aesthetic, versus, you know, the constitutionally First Amendment protected free speech.
My counterpoint to that would be, I would like to consider what the contents of our street sweepers are, because we have street sweepers to prevent things from getting into our stormwater system. And if they're getting choked full of these, you know, buyer's guides, then, you know, it's less, there's less capacity to clean up the other things that we also need to prevent from getting into our stormwater system. So we may not see them in the drains, but that might be because we're spending all of our time and effort preventing them from going into the drains in the first place.
Yeah.
We don't have equipment to check the drains or the pipes.
Right.
That's kind of one of the big things with stormwater. So,
right. City Manager Pyle, I'll let you jump the line.
Anthony, just a quick question. Not an attorney. I didn't even spend the night at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But when we talk about an approach as a criminal violation, do all criminal charges require an intent to commit a crime?
No. So that's not really the issue. So luckily, you know, like a traffic violation, you don't have to intend to go, you know, 10 over the speed limit to get, you know, the citation and get a guilty.
Great example. I never intend to speed, but darn it.
I was like, I would have gotten out of every single ticket I've ever gotten if that were the case.
I tell people that every
helps
single day.
clarify that in my mind.
I believe Councilmember Hall was next.
Okay, well, we've, you know, circled back to this discussion multiple times, and I really appreciate the work of Assistant Attorney Purinton both times. Just want to point out that he was an intern the last time he did this work, and now he's a permanent member of the staff, and I couldn't be happier about that. But I am in total support of moving forward. I'm not even going to get into the legal issues because that's your job of why it's a criminal offense here and the civil penalty isn't an option. I'm going to leave all that up to you and just go to the anecdotal citizen response to these, which is probably right at the top of the list of what I hear about most often from Ward 4 residents. So I literally have formal communication from, I'm going to say, at least 4 or 5 people on my time on council that have gone into the deep dive of trying to be aggressive and assertive with the company. So the onus on the homeowner and that route, I think, is pointless because there is so much anecdotal evidence of how many people have tried to call this number. I have it right here. It's the number for the Oklahoman that have tried to call and get them to stop. I also have plenty of anecdotal evidence from residents in Ward 4 of, you know, this being I love the fly and fling of whether it's the contractor or the responsibility of the company. Again, I'll leave that to the experts on all of this, but I am certain, along with Mayor Clark, that if we did some kind of hotline or any kind of anecdotal evidence that you needed from residents, you're going to get it if we ask, and we ask specifically, because it's not I mean, there's so many of these that are thrown to vacant properties in Ward 4. They're not even on a property where anyone is currently living. And so they pile up, they rot, they're wet, they're in the street. People have literally sent me video of the contractor dumping these in the street, not even trying to hit a yard or a sidewalk or a house. So I would love to be the precedent setting.
Hope you muted yourself.
Sorry, I said I would love to be the precedent setting case for the 10th Circuit. I really am encouraged by how you outlined how it worked for the Lexington Fayetteville case. And I recognize that from a legal standpoint, standpoint, we may have other barriers, but I would love to pursue this in any way that we can. And to the stormwater issue, I can't even imagine that this is, I mean, if we can devise a way to measure this, that we're going to see the damage that this is doing to these going down the stormwater drains. I've literally watched them go down the drains in front of my house. So I would love to just continue to move forward in the most productive way that we can. I don't want to talk about this again in an abstract way in another 12 months. I'm with Mayor Clark. I would really like to prove to the community that we are listening, that we hear their concerns, and that we are going to pursue it. And if we run into barriers, okay, fine, but that we are going to pursue it, because contacting the company has been unsuccessful. People trying to opt out has been unsuccessful. And if the way to do this is to get them to walk it up to the door and deliver it in that manner, fine. But I'm all about moving forward with some kind of remedy.
All right. I'll call on Councilmember Holman. I just want to apologize that I skipped over probably the most time sensitive and critical topic of the evening. And since we are time limited this evening, I'd like to only spend a couple more minutes on it. But so Councilmember Holman.
Sure. Yes, I definitely support continuing to move forward, looking at this issue and how to address it in the suggested ways that might be possible, given, again, I understand it's different circuit court, could be different opinions, but kind of using that framework that seems to have worked somewhere else. And I know that, emails, junk emails and text messages almost always have a click here to unsubscribe at the bottom in really small letters. And a lot of junk text messages will say like, reply stop to, get off this. And so I don't know if that is something that is required by law, that they have to do that. And if it's required by law or could be required by law for this. Like, to me, this is the same kind of unsolicited communication that a junk email or text message would be. And if they're required by law to have that opt out, text, stop to reply to stop or whatever, click here to unsubscribe. I get a lot of them to the city council email, actually, a lot of random junk emails that, I'll just go down and click unsubscribe. Don't know how I got on it in the first place, but anyway, so that might be something to look into as well. I'm somewhat hesitant to ask our state government for help on anything, but this might be something worthy of a formal resolution from the city of Norman to our state delegation, to the Attorney General. I don't know, to say, we can't be the only community either. That's on my list too. Maybe reach out to other cities in Oklahoma, small towns, or even Edmond, Broken Arrow, Lawton, any of these other cities that might be having these issues from their residents as well. Maybe we can, form some kind of coalition together, and maybe it could take some state government action, something like that, perhaps, if needed. But
OML might be a good resource.
Yeah, OML. And so, I just saw someone posting about this on Facebook on one of the word pages the other day. So it's pretty constant. And the vacant properties is a real problem. Many rental properties in Ward 7, and see them when you're out. When I was running for re-election, I would see some empty properties where they were piled up. And then, with the homeowner thing, I would worry that with elderly homeowners or disabled, that requiring them to go pick it up or expecting them to go pick it up out of the middle of the yard or off the sidewalk might not be realistic. So, but anyway, I definitely think we need to continue working on this issue, because I agree it's one of the real constant issues that citizens around the city seem to be upset about, and understandably, in my opinion. Thanks.
You will all receive pictures, the video you mentioned, Councilmember Hall, anything like that, send them our way and we'll start building our file. We're certainly not opposed to drafting an ordinance. We just want you to know, eyes wide open, we're probably going to get some litigation. This could be Anthony's first 10th Circuit case to argue. This would be awesome. But I fully anticipate we will have some litigation.
I wouldn't be surprised. I feel like there are some issues where, maybe we should balk at the idea of litigation. I feel like this is one that is worth pursuing. One suggestion to help make the cataloging of any resident provided data a little bit easier might be to consider a public facing Google map. Plot your pin, upload your photo, upload video or a description, and it gets saved right on the server, which allows you guys to access it and catalog it. But it's also hosted in one place, and that's easy for residents to do. So just a thought on that one. I would also love to see you guys use it for sidewalk repairs, to report sidewalk repairs that way. And on both of these topics, good luck and Godspeed, because neither of these things will be completed before I'm gone. So, all right. And now on to our third and probably most looked forward to topic regarding vacancies and selection committees thereof. I'm actually going to pull my agenda back up because I don't have it in front of me. Discussion regarding the process of filling council vacancies. So obviously this is not something that I really necessarily wanted us to be talking about yet again, but here we are. So we've had this conversation. I don't know that we've had this conversation at the committee level yet, but obviously it's one we've had publicly in council meetings and across social media. We are under a little bit of a time crunch for this one. So we can kind of talk about the general process of filling vacancies while we talk specifically about how we're going to structure the selection committee for this one. There are 4 people on this call who might want to kind of take it away from the top. Any of the 4 of you want to kind of take it away? Mayor Clark, City Manager Pyle, City Attorney Walker.
I'll start, and then City Clerk, City Attorney, and City Manager, I think, can help fill in the facts right now. So we had planned on an election in June. Can't happen because we've been preempted by the state on when we can have candidate elections. I have been speaking with Representative Bell to see if we can create some sort of exemption to that law. I guess I get trying to fight voter fatigue, but they're not letting us do our job. Look at what they've done. And so maybe an exemption could be created to allow candidate elections in the event of a death or a resignation. It's not going to be done fast enough. So just want to throw that out there. We have, I believe, until May 18th to appoint someone. Please, correct me if I'm wrong. I see head shakes, yes. Or we have to have a special election, which won't be until September, which is a huge waste of resources. And I think a lot to ask of any candidate, because the moment they get sworn in, they're going to have to start campaigning again for a February election. So we will be doing the appointment process to fill the Ward 2 vacancy. We have had to do this 4 times before. I think I have some sort of record as mayor. So tired of making history in weird, unfortunate ways. And so we need to streamline it. I do appreciate the fact that residents have a voice in selecting the replacement. So we need to, again, streamline it because they were all a little bit different. Each had its pros and cons in how they were executed. I would like this to be cleaned up and formalized, and perhaps in the charter, since we're working on that process, so future councils don't have to keep wrestling with this, because I'm not going to rely on the state legislature to fix this. So that's where we're at. And I think Councilmember Hall has a good overview of, she's watched all of them and done minutes more than I have, to be honest. I participated in one, but we need to decide first what the application looks like, because since we're trying to appoint by May 18th, I would like to get those applications out there as soon as possible. And then the next would be guidance on how is the committee selected, because I need to get that going rather quickly as well. So I think in timeline, and then we can work on what the committee needs to do. So does everyone agree with that timeline, given the pinch that we're in? Okay. So
Yeah, I think that's
application-
the kind of the point. Long term, we don't have the time to develop a long-term plan before May 18th.
Yep. So we need to, well, hopefully what we do come up with is the final product, but we need to do those things first based on the crunch. So that's my contribution as for background into this discussion.
So I know we had some kind of early discussions. I feel it feels like a year ago, but it was only about a month ago after we found out about the Ward 2 vacancy. We talked about, instead of kind of hosting a selection process, the possibility of relying on our current slate of former Ward 2 council members, of which we have 3 who still live in the ward. We have also the family of our recently departed colleague who also still live in the ward. Or we have the option of going completely new once again. So I feel like that's going to be kind of the first point of feedback. So Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, I feel like we have 2 different conversations. One is the short-term conversation and how we go forward with Ward 2, and then the longer-term, issue of establishing some consistency with the selection committee process. So I've really taken a pretty deep interest in this because I myself was appointed through the selection committee process. And so through the appointments that I've been a part of since I've been on council, plus my own personal experience, I have gone back through all 4 of the processes. And I think the most glaring thing about it is the lack of consistency in basically the rules of engagement about how the selection committee should operate. And I think part of what, some of the teeth gnashing that we've had about all of this is the fact that I think as a council, we've expected a certain result. And I'm not sure that was communicated very clearly to each committee. It was kind of left up to each committee to make up how they were going to go about it. So I think there's some really concrete steps that we could take over the long haul, which, involves, a way to develop consensus out of the committee. I think there seems to be some consensus about having a single candidate represented to the council to take care of some past controversies about how previous appointments were made before July of 2019. And just certain things that came out of the 4 different committees that have been appointed since 2019. So we can get to those, but for the immediate issue, I am just so frustrated that we have our hands tied and being limited to only using the September election date. So one of my first questions is, I so appreciate the mayor working with Representative Bell to try to see if there's a workaround, because it just seems completely arbitrary to me that we are not allowed to use the June 8th election for a candidate. And we've already had an exemption to that, and it was last year, and it was because of the pandemic. We had a runoff election in April that was canceled, and we were allowed to have that runoff election in June. So we already have a precedent for an exemption. So I absolutely do not understand why we don't have a path, because of these extraordinary circumstances, to take it back to the voters as soon as we can. So that's probably beating the dead horse, but I just have to say that out loud, because my preference all along has been to get the selection of a ward representative back to the voters as quickly as we could. And in this particular case, our hands are being completely tied for no particular reason that I can understand. So there's that. So I don't know if we still have the option of using that precedent as we move forward. We did it last year, and we were allowed to have the runoff election in June. So there's that. I think we're under a time is of the essence now, because I don't think it's, as much as I would like to take this back to the voters, I thought we had the elegant solution for the June 8th option. And when that was taken away from us, now we're back to ground zero. So for this particular set of circumstances, not necessarily the long-term solution of how we put a selection committee together, I actually support going back to the best we can do to have the selection committee made up of people who were voted in by the voters of Ward 2. And so that would be, the previous council members, if they're willing to serve. And I would also recommend that if we go that route, that that Britton Perry, David Perry's son, fill that position to represent the candidacy of his father. He was intimately involved in the election process. He worked side by side with his dad on both campaigns. He's very familiar with the demographics and the makeup of Ward 4. And I think that would be appropriate in this case. So I'll just start.
I will say I have had a conversation both with Joe Carter and Alicia Cargila about this. They are willing to serve if asked. And I do believe that City Clerk, that Brenda has had reached out to Richard Stowicki as well. I don't know if you were able to get a hold of him.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he is willing to.
So we would have a selection committee of 4 available pretty quickly. The one benefit that 4 would have is that it does require a consensus vote. Whether we task them with ranked choice voting or simply ask them to vote until one has a majority, that would require 3 of them out of the 4, which is about as close to a consensus as you can get. So, and whether or not, I think that who serves on the selection committee isn't something that necessarily needs to be codified by the charter. But if we can model the process that we think could work most effectively, if we're having Charter Review Commission review a proposal, it would be good to put a proposal together and say, and it worked very well because we just utilized it. So instead of tasking them with coming up with the process, we can come up with a draft for them and ask them to tweak it or change it or approve it or reject it, however they see fit. Councilmember Holman.
Thank you. Let's see. I definitely agree that for this one anyway, 4 members. I would agree with, the 3 former Ward 2 council members are willing to do it. I think that's a good idea. And I definitely would support asking Britton Perry or his mother, whichever one would be the most interested or able or willing to be on that as well. One thing we could consider going forward is maybe consider expanding the duties of the election commission to when a vacancy comes up on city council, the election commission gets convened and they interview the candidates and then they make a recommendation to the city council. So that could be one maybe easier way instead of trying to, there may not always be 3 former council members available or around, or even 1, sometimes. So, and if it's time sensitive, maybe it's difficult to find 4 people that you want to put on there. Maybe not. So, but that could be something to consider, is that we have an election commission. Maybe one of their duties in the future could be to be on standby if this happens. They can convene, they can review the applications and do interviews and then give us recommendation.
It would depoliticize the selection committee process, because it seems like even who serves on the selection committee becomes a hot topic in filling replacements. So
right. And the election commission is, under our new stuff would be, 3-year terms of, with 3 terms possible. So that could be one solution going forward to address this situation. And then I do think it needs to be clear direction that we want one nominee, a consensus decision. And I like the idea of 4 members. They got to get, 3 out of 4. I think that's pretty fair. And one of the questions I want to make sure is absolutely on the application is, have you voted in a city election before? I think that's got to be on there. That needs to be something anybody applying has got to answer. And
that was going to be something that I was going to hope to include as part of the information to the interviewers is the last 10 years of municipal voting history.
Yes.
Just a question for Catherine. I don't know if this is a thing at all, but if the criteria is more strict than the criteria necessary to run for office, does that cause you a problem? To run for office, you got to be 18 years old with a pulse and an address, and you're allowed to run. So I think I'm, just an accountant, but if the criteria is different to apply to be appointed, you might get criticism that way. Whereas if you're, hey, panel that you're going to select from, these are things we think were important, you might get there, but you might not get sued if somebody's not eligible to apply for filling the vacancy. Just a thought, but I'll let Catherine answer that.
Yeah, I think that's information we can ask for, but I don't think that can be used as a basis to disqualify someone from applying. Look at that however they would, just like voters do. But
maybe better that it's provided after they choose who they interview. That municipal voting history is provided then.
Yeah.
Or at least, like I said, just a question that asks have you voted in. It doesn't have to be Norman city elections. It could, maybe you just moved here, but you voted every time in your old town. I agree. It wouldn't need to be necessarily if you answer this that you haven't, you're out, you're disqualified, we're not going to interview, but just a question of information. It definitely needs to be asked because that became such a problem in the fall with the Ward 2 appointment that was really a deciding factor for several of us that, I could not feel comfortable appointing somebody to city council that doesn't vote in city council elections. People may feel comfortable voting for somebody that does. I
don't see it really any different than, have you ever been charged with a felony? It's just a question. It doesn't have any bearing on whether or not you're eligible to run for city council, but it is a question that you could be held accountable for if you answer dishonestly.
Yeah.
So
I do want to make sure that however we go about it, that the committee, that is something they know to ask for, because I guess the committee members didn't ask about it, and then it came up afterwards, and then it just was a big mess. So that is just something I find very important. Again, I think some of the difference may be that we're appointing somebody. I kind of feel like if the voters at large can elect whoever they want, and if they want to elect somebody that never votes and doesn't care, then that's their thing. But if the city council members are being asked to appoint somebody, and be one of 9 people up here, maybe it does. Maybe it would qualify for a little more scrutiny, or perhaps. However, but that was one big point of it, and then. To Councilmember Hall's point about June. So June, the change in the state law allows municipal officer elections in June if it's in an even numbered year. So we weren't really given an exemption last year, or it was allowed. But that's one of the things I really cautioned people about in regard to the petition from Unite Norman about requiring a vote of the people to fill vacancies. A lot of folks that may not agree with Unite Norman thought, oh, that seems like a reasonable one, actually. And I cautioned people that because of state law, that would actually be a very bad idea because, 75-day minimum requirement of notification exists to have an election. So anytime there's a vacancy on city council, it could sit vacant for almost 3 months minimum before we could fill it with a vote. And then in odd numbered years like this, we could be in a situation where we can't fill it for 6 months or more. And so that's all. The change in the state law is why we decided a couple of years ago to change our local elections to February general, April runoff, because February ended up being the only month that was available in both odd and even numbered years. April is also available, but in odd numbered years, if we had the general election in April and there ended up being a runoff, it wouldn't be until September, which is 2 months after when our charter says you have to be sworn in. So that is why, for anybody watching at home, that is why our city council elections are in February with runoffs in April, because state law says those are the only 2 months we can do it and not conflict with our city charter in other ways. So
What is the distinction,
yeah.
Councilmember Holman, what is the distinction of why it's why is that even a thing, that it's even in odd numbered years? Do you know?
Because in even numbered years, they have the state primary in June.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And so, well, people talked about like November, but we can't have municipal officer elections in every November. And state and federal elections aren't every November, because we always hear that. Why don't the city council just do it every November and we can get turnout? And, well, we don't have state and federal elections every November, and we can't do it every November. And also have, not conflict with our city charter as far as when people get sworn in and stuff. Maybe that'll change too, but anyway, that's my thoughts on that with the Ward 2. I definitely support the 4 members, 3 former council members, Britt and Perry, and getting a consensus decision back from them. And I would like us to see us, get this process rolling, as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Councilmember Foreman.
So Mayor Clark, you may have a record of a number of appointments as mayor, but in my 9 months, this will be our 4th time to try to fill the seat. Sean Boyd appointing Joe, Matt McGarry. So given those circumstances, I think my 2 cents is a little bit different, and you all can just say I'm crazy, and that's okay too. But I would prefer to see us not have to go through a selection committee. I would prefer council to make an appointment. And my preferred way would be to go backwards on the last duly elected officials. Dave Perry, either Britton or Margaret, if they're willing to serve, I would be comfortable appointing them tomorrow. If not, then Joe Carter, and then just keep going backwards in that way, because these are at least people that have been duly elected already by the people. And we have our first budget hearing on April 27th. And I know Ward 2 wants representation before then. And so I would hate to have to wait to do a selection committee. And I would just, my preference would be for us to make an appointment going back.
Appreciate you. I like differences of opinion. I won't call you crazy on public TV, but I might think it. If we did do the selection committee, the earliest we would be able to swear someone in, could be as early as whatever special meeting we call after the selection committee has made their decision. So kind of gaming out a timeline, if we were confident enough in a process moving forward to, by resolution, establish the selection committee on Tuesday, we could announce the opening of applications for appointment to the seat on Sunday, have it open for a week, appoint the selection committee on Tuesday, have them start reviewing applications by mid-April, and could potentially have someone selected and sworn in at a meeting right about public hearing time. So May 18th is just the latest. May 11th is the latest regularly scheduled council meeting. But I do see your point about having representation at the budget committee. So I guess kind of pitch it back to everyone else of, could we, or City Manager Pyle, could we hustle up the timeline for a selection committee to kind of split the baby, so to speak?
Well, I think where the ability for a representative of Ward 2 to add value to the Ward 2 opinion at the point where council says application materials will be available on the city's website. There's going to be a big link that said, hey, Ward 2, if you're interested, click here. The first page that pops up could say, if you are interested in applying to be appointed, we strongly encourage you to begin to review council meetings. We got to tell them right up front, we want you to be up to speed the day you hit the chair. So all applicants, you need to prep assuming you're going to be it. This is like the understudy role for a Broadway play. You have to be ready to go on game day because the public hearing is going to start and you're going to be expected to represent. So I think there is an opportunity for those interested to prepare and actually be of value to Ward 2. We just need to make sure they understand the expectations. So staff can make that so. I'll look at my clerk and say, Brenda, is there anything in that timeline as described by Council Member Biermann that you see from a parliamentarian's perspective that might be undoable?
No, I mean, I think that is doable. We've often in the prior appointment processes have tried to, proceed in a quick manner. So typically once the application is opened, we try to get the nominating committee together immediately and then set up interviews either that same week or the following week so that they can, turn it around fairly quickly. So I don't think the time frame between now and May 11th or April 27th would be pretty difficult. But as Daryl stated, we could, they could participate by watching the study session on April the 20th. And then, of course, the 27th is a public hearing when council's just listening to comments received from the public. So they would still be able to, participate in those meetings or watch them. And I think May 11th is very doable.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's certainly try and make sure to hammer home that whoever does apply it is expected that they will be participating and paying attention starting from the moment they submit their application. I would also strongly encourage the selection committee members who should understand it as former council members or family members of, to be cognizant of that in their questions. And so kind of on that procedural point, there are a couple things that I want to hit on kind of based on our recent experiences. I thought Council Member Nash's post first Ward 2 selection committee analysis was really excellent. And it's something I've reviewed several times and wanted to bring some of those points up today. One is that we should request that the selection committee limit the number of applicants that they interview for a variety of reasons. One being that when you split them across 2 days, the applicants that are being interviewed on the second day, which is also decision-making day, are at an advantage because they were interviewed the most recently. They're the most resonant in the selection committee's minds. So I think that it would be important for the selection committee to limit their interviews to only ones that they can do in a single day or whatever window of time is provided for that. Whether it's 3 applicants or 5, let's limit it to their top choices. Along those same lines, I don't believe that interview questions should be provided to candidates in advance. That does not lend itself to displaying knowledge on the spot. It's basically the function of a take-home essay as opposed to an in-class test. Open book versus knowledge in your head. So I think that it would be appropriate, obviously, for the selection committee to create questions, maybe with the assistance of staff, maybe with solicit suggestions from the public, but then keep them from the applicants until those applicants are in the interview. I want to know what you know about TIFs based on your past research, not because I'm going to ask you about TIFs. So I think that will be important as well, as to really kind of get some genuine, honest answers and not prepared answers. I also wonder, with a selection committee of 4, if there might be any value to the selection committee being chaired by staff to help keep the selection committee moving along and on task and you know,
I think
guided by
there's
staff as
value.
opposed to one of the four of them.
Yeah, just so they all four can equally participate and not be distracted
Right.
with the timing
With the
of
administration
the
of the
interviews.
meeting or,
No,
you
we'd
know,
be
things
happy
like
to do
that.
that.
So I didn't want to, you know, suggest anyone in particular. I'll leave that up to you all. But, you know, if we're having a smaller selection committee, maybe it would be better for them to focus on the interviews and the applicants and not how to manage each other. Councilmember Hall.
I also reviewed Councilmember Nash's recommendations and, you know, just want to pile on with, I think those were really valid points to make. And I do like the idea of having, in this particular instance, having city staff act as chair and really the process piece of it so that, you know, we don't have to get distracted by all of that. I do think it's.
I also think it's conducive to better working together. That way they're not policing each other or one of them
Yeah.
is trying to police the rest of them.
Yeah. And I think it needs to be really clear from the outset of how they're going to reach consensus. And that's what the expectation is, whether that's through ranked choice voting or just, you know, staying in the room. I think all of those types of parameters need to be set out beforehand so everybody understands what they're working towards and that we are, I think, clear that we want a single recommendation. We want them to vet the candidates and have a single recommendation to council.
Councilmember Hall, can I pause you and ask if anyone has any strong feelings about ranked choice voting versus just multiple rounds of voting? Obviously, the benefit of ranked choice voting is that it's just one vote. Multiple voting might allow for additional conversation and more consensus. Does anyone feel strongly one way or the other? Councilmember Foreman.
I feel better about just multiple voting because you could say, okay, well, why did you pick this? Why that? And then, like you said, the more dialogue, the more conversation, maybe they can get a consensus faster and easier that way.
Okay.
I'm fine with that. I just want it to be clear from the beginning of what the process is going to be.
Yeah, I'd just rather be able to walk, you know, for time's sake, I'd rather be able to walk away from here knowing that, you know, no one had any real concerns with multiple rounds of voting. So maybe that's the direction, you know, we proceed when we're writing this up. So.
Yeah, and I do also agree with just the suggestion of whatever questions are being asked that happen at the interview process, because that is also a way to assess the readiness of the candidate to step in and do the work. And one of the things that happened along the way with one of the selection committees in particular was that not every candidate even had access for one reason or another, and so did not even have the opportunity to you know, fill out the questionnaire beforehand. So just evening the playing field and making sure that, you know, everybody has the same access as everyone else. So I agree with that. And depending on the applicant pool, I also agree that however we use the application going forward, that it's robust enough for the committee to be able to screen applicants for who they want to interview, whether it's 3 people or 5 people, but definitely think it should be done in one setting. And let's see, I think we covered everything else. Yeah. So that's pretty much where I am too.
I will point out that if we are going to be doing multiple rounds of voting, if you're just sheer algorithmic sake, limit to 3 applicants. At ranked choice, if you're going to do 5, ranked choice can still work. If you're going to do 3, you know, let's not do multiple rounds of voting on 5 candidates. You're going to end up with 1, 1, 1, 1, a lot.
I like 3 as well, but what's the criteria for deciding who gets an interview?
It's the selection. I mean, it's the selection committee's determination.
But then do they have to reach consensus on that? What if out of 5, they pick all different 3 with like 1 or 2?
That could be ranked choice voting, because then, you know, you're going to get still at least a couple of the ones that you wanted, even if not all of them. I think for the final selection, multiple rounds of voting will reach a better consensus with less hurt feelings. I think to decide who to interview, ranked choice voting could work really well. Okay.
I also was I forgot to mention this both times. So since we did specifically mention the outreach to the former council members, the outreach has also been made to Britton Perry, and he is willing to serve if asked.
Okay, great. So it does sound like we could get a resolution together for Tuesday to formalize the selection committee. And do we have any thoughts about the robustness of the current application? I didn't have any concerns with it, Mayor Hall or Mayor Clark.
I asked Brenda if she could share it so we could look at it real quick.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Any way to full screen that, Brenda? Or zoom in to 200%?
There we go.
Okay, that's better. Can you read the header for that big block? Does it say explain why you are interested in serving as council member for Ward 2? Feel free to attach additional information. Is that what it says?
On the board or commission application, because I've looked at a lot of these lately, it mentions, is there any potential conflict? Like it.
Oh, yes.
That. Why don't we have that on here?
Yeah, can we add that on there?
I would be good with a question about, in addition to the employment and the experience, have you served the city of Norman, your involvement with the city? A question like that.
Okay, my apologies. I couldn't find my microphone because I covered it up with all these other pages. So
sorry.
If it's not big enough for you to see, let me see. It is that a little more helpful?
Yeah.
So basically, it's the same information that we have on our board applications at the top. The civic activities kind of gives them an opportunity to show, and that could be changed and reworded, but that kind of shows how they've been involved in the community. And then just the additional employment, but I mean, we can add the question about voting in municipal elections or whatever you want to add to this, but that's kind of what it looks like right now.
Yeah, I think any conflicts of interest would be a good one. I think maybe there was one more that
strengthening civic activities to specifically city of Norman.
Civic and municipal activities.
Yeah, like make that more strongly worded, more specific.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I also, I mean, unless there's just a valid reason about the point that was brought up earlier about the voting record, I know, again, from personal experience, that was a question that was asked in the selection committee that I participated in. And as a candidate, there's always someone industrious to go back and look at everybody's voting record and make sure that the voters in your ward have access to that information if they want to. So if it's possible to add that, I think that's certainly something that comes up over and over again from the voters and an interest that they have about, what kind of a responsibility have you taken to be a voter?
Yeah, I think if applicable, the last 10 years of voting history. I mean, obviously we can't go, if someone's only lived in Norman for 6 months, obviously there's not going to be much in the way of voting history, and we don't necessarily have access to the voting history for people in other communities, but whatever your Norman voting history is, I see it just, again, for informational purposes. I mean, I understand City Manager Pyle's question,
Right.
but I think like the felony charge, it's just a way to provide information kind of under penalty of perjury, but not something to disqualify you.
It's not a litmus test, but it could be a tiebreaker.
Right. Exactly.
And the reason that question came up in the Ward 4 interviews was a suggestion of one of the committee members, Andy Rieger, and he made the suggestion based on his professional experience at the transcript. That was one of the things they would do when they were looking at candidates, would go look at their voter records. So that's how that all came about. And nobody else has ever, brought that up before.
Yeah, it's definitely been something that's been taken on more as members of the community, providing that for their fellow voters. But I think especially in this kind of situation, I think Councilmember Holman had the appropriate perspective. We are almost gifting someone a position that they don't have to go to voters for. And as we all know, running a campaign is hard work and it's time consuming and it takes a lot of resources. Stepping into an appointed position is an entirely different animal. And so I think having more information be a part of this rather than less is always going to be a good thing and always going to serve voters more than not asking these questions.
And honestly, I think we didn't ask the voter one because why would you apply for city council if you're not a regular voter?
An assumption on our part, yes. Okay, I'm feeling pretty comfortable about this and feel like this is going to give us a really solid foundation for something to present to Charter Review Commission for more formal codification. Any last questions or comments?
Can we for sure get this on for Tuesday? We feel good about that?
I mean,
I see some heads nodding.
If all you're trying to do Tuesday is appoint your committee,
yeah,
then, and you have the 4 commitments of the 4 people, then absolutely it's not going to be a big deal to put that on the agenda. I mean, we do print agenda tomorrow, but if you're trying to write a resolution that outlines all of this process before and to be done tomorrow for the agenda may be a little bit more problematic.
This might be something for City Attorney Walker to weigh in on, but I kind of feel like that's that portion of it. While I think it's important that we discuss it publicly so that the public knows when we're passing the resolution to establish the selection committee that we have addressed some of the concerns that have been brought up previously about the actual administration of that committee. But that doesn't necessarily need to be included in the resolution in order for us to accomplish it for this selection committee. Is that correct, Catherine?
That's correct. I mean, we can take that feedback on the application and then share with the chair, or actually if staff's chair and maybe share with the committee what you all have asked for and move forward with this appointment in that way now. And just so you know, the Charter Commission does have a recommendation on this section of the charter. They really liked the committee process. So their recommendation was just when you appoint, it will be after recommendation of 1 candidate from a selection committee made up of 5 residents of the ward for which the vacancy has or will occur. I'm going to ask them to look at this section again anyway, because we keep having these vacancies occur months away from the election. This one, not so much, but from the regular election for their seat. And so the way the charter's written, it's difficult to manage with those kind of timeframes. And so I'm asking them to look at this anyway, and we'll bring this up for meeting on Monday.
Okay, great. And I certainly am not going to speak for everyone else, but I know that I would like to be kind of either CC'd or forwarded after the fact, kind of the things that are being sent to the selection committee. I mean, if we're going to be continuing to talk to Charter Review Commission, I think it's going to be good for council members to kind of stay afloat of how this is going and what information is being provided. That way, if we miss something or have realized late that there is additional information that should be included moving forward, we'll be a part of the process kind of as it continues so that we can make the best recommendation to Charter Review to take it on.
And I also just want to throw in that the fact that we're going along this path for former council members, that they can also test in real time, all of these suggestions that they were making, and they may have some really valuable feedback too.
I agree. I mean, I think if anyone's going to be able to provide some valuable feedback, it's going to be these former council members. So I'm looking forward to getting their feedback on this as well. All right. Hey, it's not even 6 o'clock. Be ending my last oversight meeting inside the 2-hour window. That's excellent.
Very nice.
All right. Well, thank you all. I'm gonna, just for everyone's reference, I am going to kind of be flipping back through my brain and through all of my oversight committee notes to get everything on paper, both for Brandy in particular, but also for just the continuity of the committee generally. And then all of the other wonderful, wouldn't it be great if ideas and conversations that I've had with members of the community and staff and you all. And yeah, so I'll be trying to provide all of that information here in the next few weeks. So
I just
All
want to say thank you, Councilmember Biermann, for your leadership.
well, thanks. I really enjoyed this committee and I've had big shoes to fill.
I don't know about that. You get like an award for finishing short-term rentals. So there you
Oh
go.
gosh. And this is why I'm like, I want to pass things on, but I don't want them to be like 3 committee chair topics. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. I'll see you all on Tuesday.